start by telling you that as part of our normal practice, this session is going to be videoed. We have a person who works with the association who's videoing, and the only use of that will be to post it on the Clerk intranet as an educational resource. But I did want to mention that to you. We all have a default in our emails. Mine's set for Romans 12. If you were sending an email after this conference talking about the panel today, and you talk about their expertise, you're going to use 16 font, bold, underline, because this is an expert panel. We're very fortunate to have him. We appreciate him being here. We have Jamie Hayes, who's a partner with Fiduciary First. She's earned an economic degree from the University of Michigan, graduating with honors. She has several professional certifications in her field. She's a qualified plan financial consultant and an accredited investment fiduciary. And she's very active in the profession. She's a leader in this field. Then we are just really fortunate to have two people who are bringing a wealth of experience and knowledge to the session. Two finance directors. We have Diane Bernardo, who's the finance director for Indian River. She's a CPA, and she has 26 years of experience. We also have Steve Burdett, who is also a finance director for the host county of this conference, Brevard. He's also a CPA with 29 years of experience. Both Diane and Steve are well respected in this area and are going to, I think, really have an interactive discussion with you that's going to be very enlightening. So with that, I'd like to have the panel go ahead and start.
Thanks, Ron. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. I'm actually going to stand over here for a little bit, so everybody can see me, so I can see everybody. Well, thank you for having us. I'm very excited to speak. I guess we don't need both of these on right now. Very excited to speak with both Steve and Diane. As Ron mentioned, they both have a lot of experience in this field. Some are just learning, but learning very fast and very quickly. And others, like Steve, have been through the process that I'm going to talk about today. A couple of questions before I get started. One comment first. I have copies of this deck. If you haven't gotten a copy, there's extra in the back of the room, so you can grab it on the way out. A couple of questions before I get started is, how many of you in here, just by way of hands, have a 457 plan in the organization? And, or 401A, for that matter, 401A, 457 contribution plans. How many use more than one vendor? Nationwide, ICMA, Great West, Mass Mutual? Okay. How many of you know the revenue that they're earning from the plan? Okay, we're going to talk about that today. I wasn't going to call on any of you that said you know, just so you know. Well, thank you for the introduction. I don't need to go through any part of my bio, but today I'm really excited to talk to you about fiduciary responsibility and best practices for managing a 457 plan to make sure that it is the most successful plan for the benefit of your employees. I've included at the end of this presentation a fiduciary checklist as well that kind of summarizes everything that I'm going to talk about. And they give you a checklist that you can go back to your office and document what you're doing internally with you and your teams. A little bit of foundation, just for clarity. I wanted to put this up here, the oversight and best practices for 457 plan. And I'll just like you do with any other contract and any other service providers and product providers that you have, there should be a diligent review process. You all go through very diligent RFP processes for any type of service that your partner, any product that you're going to provide for your city, for your employees, or whatever it may be. And just like that, the 457 plan, the 401A plan, needs to be monitored and reviewed as often as quarterly, but certainly on a consistent basis, and that's what we're going to talk about. So you can read this, but I think it is very important to note that when a state or local government decides to offer a 457 plan, the first thing that must be determined is fiduciary governance. meaning who is going to govern these plans? Who's going to monitor them and manage them for the benefit of your employees? So I'm going to talk about what is reasonable and customary for your processes internally and how you can document that appropriately on a consistent and prospective basis. So you're going to hear me throughout this presentation say some of the same words over and over again. Obviously, fiduciary is an important word, and as Diane has learned over the last couple weeks, you can paint a wall with what that term means and what the definition is and who is a fiduciary and why and when and roles and functions, etc. You're also going to hear me talk about processes and documentation, which is all very important. A couple of other best practices that I wanted to talk about is that although 457 plans are not governed by ERISA, some of you may or may not have been in the private sector before and know that 401k plans in the private sector are governed by ERISA, and there are very specific rules and regulations to follow. Well, the best practices for governmental plans is to act as if you are governed by ERISA and implement those prudent practices to ensure basic compliance. So generally speaking, best practice for operating a 457 and managing it within an organization is to first establish a retirement plan committee. That committee may be made up typically of finance and HR, maybe somebody, if you have any internal legal personnel, and put together a plan that's going to meet consistently. Whether that's semi-annually or quarterly, depending on your internal processes, we typically recommend that you actually meet and report on the plan quarterly. And when I say report on the plan, there's many different components of the fiduciary best practices process that you're going to be wanting to document, that you're opining on, and deeming things like fees and costs that we're going to talk about in a moment, reasonable and customary for services provided. Also, having an investment policy statement. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. An investment policy statement is the backbone of how your committee will be managing and monitoring the plan, the funds, and the fees on a quarterly basis, meaning how many funds are you going to have in your lineup that you provide to your employees. So generally speaking, let's say you have a nationwide plan. I've seen nationwide 457s that offer 50 different funds to the employees. How and when are you going to watch list some of those funds? How are you going to benchmark the investment options? Why would you add a specific asset category, or why would you delete a particular fund within an asset category if it's subperforming its peer group for a certain amount of time? The investment policy statement will dictate how, when, and why you're doing these. And then the committee needs to document that consistent process, that you're in compliance with that investment policy statement. So today, I really like this second paragraph. Today I'm going to explain the proper processes that you can implement internally to ensure that fees are reasonable. Nobody raised their hand at the beginning of the meeting, so we know if you all in finance and the positions, the expertise, and how financially astute you all are, do not know the revenue that your vendors are earning off of these plans and the funds. How are your employees? You know, your employees get a statement every quarter, and yeah, the information might be in there somewhere, but if they're opening it, you know, they see the big bold number, which is their balance. That's all net of fees, so they don't know what they're paying to get that balance. But we all know that whatever fees they're paying is eroding their rate of return. So we need to make sure that the fees they're paying are reasonable and customary for the services provided. And if not, let's negotiate the contract, let's get the fees down and increase their net rate of return. It's all in the best interest of our employees. So first, taking a step back and discussing what is a fiduciary anyway. As I mentioned before, Diane has learned that it's such a broad term, and especially in the government sector where ERISA is not it's very difficult to get a true definition. So what I'm going to really talk about today is what are the fiduciary best practices and who is a fiduciary internally in your organization. So typically fiduciaries are going to be companies, entities, counties, cities are usually the named fiduciaries. Committees, in the HR folks, the finance folks that sit on the retirement plan committee and make decisions based on the plan for the benefit of the employees are going to be fiduciaries. Anybody providing investment advice or a fee. That would include somebody in my position, an advisor or consultant would be a fiduciary to the plan. What is the significance of being a fiduciary? The significance is that when you're in a fiduciary role, you must satisfy the highest standard of care known to law. And you must act in the best interest of your employees. And this is often understood, especially for employees and employers who may wear two hats. They may have some function of their job that requires them to act in a fiduciary capacity, and they may have other functions that require them to act in an administrative non-fiduciary capacity. So what is the difference, and who are the fiduciary players? So again, it's typically going to be the employer, people in HR, finance, anybody who's sitting on the retirement plan committee. And there's also a test of function, meaning even if you're not by job title or by job definition a fiduciary, you may be acting in a fiduciary capacity and thus have to act in the best interest of the employees, not in the best interest of the employer. Okay? So I wanted to talk about this a little bit more. The distinguishing the roles between fiduciary and non-fiduciary. So think about a CFO or a finance director and the duties that you all have during the day. Some are administrative, but when you walk into a retirement plan committee meeting and you're sitting at the table and you're discussing the 457 or 401A plans, you have to put on your fiduciary hat and act in the best interest of the employees, or there may be a conflict of interest. An example that I see a lot of times is, this is in the private sector, I see it a lot, but you can probably relate it in the government market as well. A 457 provider may walk in the door and want to do business with you or want to sell you a product or a service, and they may offer a discount on another line of business that they're providing, like health and welfare or interest rate on a credit line at the bank or something like that. So the CFO might be thinking, well, gosh, that sounds really cool over here because that's way below my budget on the health and welfare or the credit line. So he may feel compelled to take action on engaging and partnering with that service provider on 457, but it may not be in the best interest of the employees. So that can lead to conflicts of interest and prohibited transaction or breach of fiduciary if you are not acting in the best interest of the employee versus the employer. So some of the fiduciary functions, appointing and delegating duties to other plan fiduciaries. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Managing the assets, monitoring the investment vehicles, the service providers. So once you establish a 457 plan and you're using Nationwide or ICMA or Great West, you need to manage them and monitor them, read their contracts, their agreements, their fees, and for what services are they providing, and review them annually at the very least. Comply with plan provisions. You all have plan documents and service agreements. Read those documents and service agreements. Make sure you're managing the plan in compliance with those documents and service agreements. So generally, what we want you to do is implement a process and document that process. So again, the same buzzwords that you're going to be hearing. Non-fiduciary functions, I think it's pretty clear. Some of these are called settler decisions. They're purely administrative tasks. So I have a slide on that, on slide 12 as well. Activities that are purely administrative and do not give rise to fiduciary status. So what are the duties of a fiduciary? I'm going to go through each one of these greater detail. The duty of obedience and the duty to pay only reasonable plan expenses are, in my opinion, the two most important and imperative duties of a fiduciary. The prudent person rule, which is the first here, used to be called the prudent man rule, but then the 21st century rolled around and we got to change to the prudent person rule, is to act in a like or kind manner to other prudent fiduciaries or other prudent persons that are held to that higher standard. You want to act, when you're monitoring the investments and you're monitoring the funds, you all, once again, have expertise and knowledge, and you can be your own internal fiduciaries as long as you're documenting your processes and asking the right questions. The good news is, all this gobbledygook, so legal jargon, all this gobbledygook that I'm talking about that you have to be doing internally to document your fiduciary due diligence can be outsourced, okay? So, and you actually have the duty to delegate to an expert if you cannot satisfy the prudent person rule, and or if you don't have the time nor inclination to be a full-time fiduciary and to manage the funds and the fees and the contracts and service providers, then you have the duty to outsource that to an expert. So that's the good news, is you don't need to have that responsibility and obligation and liability. It can be outsourced. And the best practices actually state that you should outsource that. The duty to follow plan documents. So there are many different types of plan documents out there that you need to be aware of and you need to be monitoring, managing, and reviewing often. The plan document, service contracts, investment policy statement. So once again, the investment policy statement is the backbone of how you are going to monitor and manage the plan, the funds and fees, internally on a consistent and objective basis. And it's best practice to have that investment policy statement that's going to dictate your internal behaviors and ensure that you're being objective and consistent. Investment management agreements, following employees' investment directives, and document your due diligence is extremely important, and I'm going to talk about why in just a moment. Obviously, the duty to segregate funds, I don't think I need to spend too much time on that, but as you know, the funds that are contributed by the employees should be segregated from the funds of the city, county, or employer. The duty of loyalty, once again, acting with your fiduciary hat on for the exclusive benefit of your employees. There's something called the exclusive benefit rule, that when you walk into that retirement plan committee meeting, you are acting in the best interest of your employee. The duty to communicate, this is interesting because information that employees get on the 457, 401A plans, they get a ton of information or they get no information, and they probably are not reading any of it. So there are some notifications that are required, they have to receive, such as quarterly statements. There's other notice, and the summary plan description. This is mandatory that they receive this. Some other organizations may take on a different approach to communicate more effectively with their employees. So there are best practices and required documentation and notifications like the SPD and the statements. That's really just the floor, right? That's what we have to do, that's baseline. But we want to go above and beyond, and we want to ensure, for best practices purposes, that our employees know what they're getting into. What is this plan? Is it really a benefit for them? In the spirit of transparency, we recommend that employers communicate with their employees effectively, proactively, and you can use some communications as PR notifications. Great news, we care about you, we have this 457 plan that we're monitoring and managing for your benefit. We've partnered with certain firms to provide the best options for you, and you may be getting information from us on a go-forward basis about watch-listed funds, fee concessions that we've negotiated successfully, etc. A lot of our clients send out quarterly notifications to their employees, letting them know what funds are on a watch list and what their plan is to do about that prospectively and where the employees can get more information. It's all written in a very easy to read manner, because the statements that they get, it's all gobbledygook. It's hard to understand. We don't know what kind of fees we're paying, and we're going to get into that right now, which is paying vendor fees. Some plan sponsors I talked to, I asked you in the beginning how many know what their vendor revenue is. Some plan sponsors think that the plan is free. I'll call somebody up and say, hey, how's it going with Great West or Nationwide? Have you reviewed the fees? Oh, there are no fees. There are no fees, but it's free. They think it's free because it's not disclosed, right? And they're not paying anything. They don't get a hard invoice from Great West or Nationwide because the employees are paying for it. So all the more reason that we need to act prudently as fiduciaries to ensure that the employees are paying reasonable fees for these investments and for the services. And by the way, what services are they even getting from these record keepers that are earning whatever fee that they're earning? So we're going to talk about what those fees look like and what fiduciaries and yourselves need to consider. We want to consider cost when selecting service providers, but we also need to benchmark those costs. So once you actually determine, you ask the right questions to your record keepers, actually get the revenue disclosure spreadsheet from them. We'll look at one in a moment. Then what? Well, now you know what their revenue is, but then what? Right? You need to benchmark it in order to deem it reasonable and customary for services provided. So I'll show you that. And if when you benchmark it, you determine that their fees are too high, well, now we need to negotiate. And by the way, best practice is also to RFP your record keepers every 3 to 5 years. So, a lot of the cities, counties, governments that I talk to, they haven't RFP'd in 15, 20 years. They've always had Great West, ICMA, Nationwide, and they've never gone out to bid or they've never reviewed their service contracts. And I would say you have to do it now, because those service contracts that are 15, 20 years old have exorbitant fees, and I bet you they haven't come to you proactively and say, great news, we're reducing our fees. But you call them up and you tell them that you're doing a benchmark and you're evaluating your fees, I bet you within a couple weeks they'll call you up proactively to reduce the fees. Just because you're doing the benchmark, you haven't even done it yet. So what are some of the plan fees that you're going to see? A lot of gobbledygook here. What that means is there's lots of hidden fees. There's an expense ratio that I think in finance we're all used to, right? If you go into the Schwab office and you ask for the American Century Fund, it's going to have an expense ratio, and you know you're going to pay that. It's going to be taken right out of the rate of return. Well, there's other fees that are included in sub-NAV, that means built into the expense ratio. There's also fees that record keepers charge on top of that. Per head fees, mortality fees, etc., etc. So here I have what we put together for our clients. So we get the revenue disclosure from the record keeper. And what that tells us, I wonder if this has a pointer. So what, can you hear me? Okay. So when you ask for a revenue disclosure spreadsheet from your record keeper, what you're going to get is a list of the fund options in the plan, the total expense ratio, and then this is the sub-NAV revenue sharing dollars. Okay? What this means, and let's look at the very top fund, the American Century Balanced Institutional Fund. If you were Joe Schmo on the street and you walked into the Schwab office and said, I want the American Century Balanced Fund, you would pay 71 basis points. Okay?
that would go to American Century Balance Institutional Money Managers, okay? When this is with the record keeper, American Century is saying, you know what, we don't need the entire 71 basis points because we're not record keeping this plan. This is in a plan. It's not an individual investment. We're not sending prospectuses, statements, the record keeper's doing this. We're going to share some of that 71 basis points with the record keeper. That's where that 35 comes from. They're giving 35 of that 71 to the record keeper. And the record keeper is turning around in this plan specifically and saying, you know what, that's not enough. We need more than that. So we're going to tack on an additional 95 basis points on top of that. So the employee is paying a total of 1.66% for the American Century balance. But if he just walked into the Schwab office, he'd be paying 71. Now, of that 166, the record keeper is getting 130 basis points. An American Century Balance Money Manager is getting the remainder 36 basis points to manage the underlying holdings in that fund. So we break it down, we break the revenue down by source and come up with a weighted balance at the end. So this is a $14 million plan. Total weighted cost to the participants was 1.95. Total revenue to the record keeper was 1.28. Okay, now we know what the revenue is. So they're making $185,000. Is that good or bad? Who knows, right? So then we benchmark it, and we see that, now you know who the record keeper was, that the record keeper was getting 1.28 on a $15 million plan. We benchmark it against a $10 million plan and a $30 million plan, and you can see that typical $10 or $30 million plans, total all-in expense should be about 100 to 111 basis points. So they're over by, call it 90 basis points, okay? We look at the total plan, that's total plan cost, right? And I said we want to break it down by source. So that's what we did here. We broke it down by source. We talked about what the money managers are getting and what the record keepers are getting. So in this instance, the money manager is getting 67 basis points, the record keeper is getting 128. We also broke it down per head. What does that mean per head? I bet you those employees had no idea that they were spending $603 per year on average, each employee, for the administrative costs associated with running that plan.
Jamie, on your previous screen, isn't it pretty difficult pulling out all that information?
Yes.
I know I found it pretty difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience getting that information and data from your record keeper?
Well, we are currently with Nationwide, and we're moving over to another plan administrator. In the past, trying to get information similar to this was very difficult, so I really had to go and compile it myself. We have our local chapter of the GFOA, and we have a consultant out of, I believe, Washington or Virginia. They came and spoke to us, and they really shared a lot of information. They pretty much volunteered if I sent our plan information to them, they could put some expense information and everything else together just to give me an idea as to what we're paying. When I go into my presentation, I'll tell you how I came up with what we're actually paying nationwide right now, and it wasn't that easy. But a lot of those that we recently spoke to, the point that they're trying to make to me is they've simplified the process. We don't have to really go and look at the revenue sharing of all these different funds. They tell us up front so that it's apples to apples with each one that we're talking to. We're going to either charge you 31 basis points, or we're going to charge you 41 basis points, and that any revenue sharing that they would get from Fidelity or whomever that they do the funds with would be netted against our cost. So at least that's what they're sharing with us.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's what you'll see when you go back to them and ask all the right questions. So you guys go through a really good process
more expensive. It's more expensive to manage than a balance fund, for example. But as you can see, the sub-NAV revenue sharing is different by fund. So they're earning 35 basis points up to 75 basis points, depending on the fund. So their total compensation varies by fund. That's a really interesting point because this is why the record keepers are non-fiduciaries. They cannot act in a fiduciary capacity because they are conflicted. They cannot tell you, the plan sponsor, nor should they be telling the employees how to direct their investments and what funds to invest in. Because the compensation to their company is directly related to what funds the employees put their money in. Now, in your situation, that's not true anymore because you've levelized the playing field. Where what we did here is, we know it's Great West, right? We went to Great West and we said, how much revenue do you need to record keep this plan? Once we get that number, okay, and negotiate that number, then we know what they need. It doesn't matter what the revenue sharing is. It doesn't matter what the wrap, and in this case, there shouldn't have been a wrap. But the sub-NAV revenue sharing dollars can all go into a pot, what you call an administrative account, and that's used to pay fees. So that 33 basis points of rev share would go into an administrative account, and that's used to pay the fees. So they don't care where the participants are putting their money. They don't care what funds you choose in the lineup. We don't need proprietary funds. Great West, you don't have to have all Great West funds. Nationwide, you don't need to have, you can have Vanguard funds or Fidelity or American Century, it doesn't matter. It should be open architecture. The record keepers should get paid. They do need money to record keep this plan. But it shouldn't depend on the funds in the lineup, and it should be reasonable and customary.
When we spoke to Nationwide, they told me about the 35 basis points for the revenue sharing, but I never got any information on the wrap. Is wrap standard, the 95 basis points, or is that just an illustration?
It's different with every plan I see. This was a $14 million plan. The city had another plan that was about $6 million, also with Great West, and that also had a 95 basis point wrap. I've seen wraps anywhere from 35 to 95 basis points. So the way they state that it's based on plan assets. So some service agreements, if you look at your old 15 or 20-year-old service agreement, it might be on a graded scale. So for the first $5 million of assets, we're at 95 basis point wrap. Then it will drop to 80 after 6 million. Then it will drop to 60. But they may not have actually done that over time. But every vendor is different with their wrap, and every plan with every vendor is different with their wrap fees. So that's why it's hard to, first of all, get the information from them and then benchmark it, because nobody else really knows what their fees are and what they should be. So we have benchmarking information for all government plans in the country and all private sector plans in the country. So we can document in your minutes that you know the fees are reasonable and customary for services provided. And if not, we know what they should be, and we negotiate. So to give you an example, and Steve's going to talk about his example, we took that same plan and negotiated the contracts with the existing record keeper. So it might sound like I'm beating up on Great West, but a practice like this, although you're lightly beating them up with a velvet hammer, is that what they say? That's the expression. It will enhance your relationship long term, because a sophisticated client is a happy client, and if you're happy, you're more likely to stay with them long term, and that's the kind of long-term partnership that they want. So the happier you are, and the more transparent things are, the better for everybody. So what we did with this particular client is the average expense ratio. The last page was a weighted basis of that 195. On average, the expense ratio plus RAC was 1.84%. We negotiated away the entire 95 basis point RAC that just went bye-bye, and then the sub-NAV revenue sharing dropped from 33 to 26. So total investment expenses dropped to 183. That's a savings of $224,000 per year in the plan for the direct benefit of the employee. That's directly going into and enhancing the employee's rate of return. That's 1% per year. So we all know what that means compounded, right? Over 50 or 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. 1%. Steve's going to talk more about what that means in numbers compound annually. But that's a huge, huge difference. Any questions so far? All right. So moving on to documenting reasonable planned expenses. To summarize, we want to understand how fees work. We want to recognize the hidden fees and incomplete disclosures, benchmark them, and then take action to protect your employees. So, the biggest takeaway here is go back to your nationwides and your ICMAs and ask for the revenue disclosure spreadsheet. If it's difficult, or if they're giving you a hard time, or if it's difficult to understand what the actual spreadsheet says when they give it to you, I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to be a resource for you anytime. So now, to wrap up my component of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the top 10 lists for fiduciary best practices, and then the last slide has a checklist for you to take back with you. So number 1 is review your internal D&O policies, your indemnification agreements. We recommend that you have plan committee resolutions and indemnity agreements as risk management approaches. Nobody wants additional liability or exposure. No one wants unnecessary exposure to liability. So what we recommend, and it's not, again, mandatory or any best practices or anything, but it is a best practice to maximize your fiduciary protection by implementing a plan committee resolution. What that does is it lists by title the people who are going to be on the retirement plan committee and act and make decisions on behalf of the plan for the benefit of the employees. The reason why we recommend putting your titles instead of names is we want your name to be far removed from any type of fiduciary obligations. And it's just a job function when your title is on the is listed on the plan committee resolution. Indemnity agreements. Again, we recommend implementing indemnity agreements wherein the organization indemnifies you personally from the liability associated with sitting on a committee. So those are different and unique approaches to maximize your protection. Hold regular plan fiduciary committee meetings. We recommend that once again you formalize a retirement plan committee, made up of, it could be, anywhere between 3 and 12 members I've seen. And you can structure it however you like. You can have voting members and non-voting members. You can have people cycle off after every few years and new people cycle on to keep it fresh. And typically there's a standard, 3 or 4 that will continue on for continuity purposes. But we recommend that you meet quarterly and that you are documenting your due diligence process. You're stating in your minutes that you've reviewed the fees and deeming them reasonable and customary for services provided. That you've reviewed the funds in conjunction with your investment policy statement and your third-party fund analytics. And Fund 1, 2, 3 are on the watch list because the investment policy statement criteria states that they need to be on the watch list.
whether it's because of poor performance, high fees, manager turnover, expense ratio, etc. And include providers, consultants, advisors. When I facilitate committee meetings, we always invite the service provider. The Nationwide, the ICMA, Squarewise, they're always invited. Everybody's sitting at the table because, once again, transparency is very important. And if we're talking about fees and costs, we're not doing anything secretively. We want everyone to be aware of what our goals are, which is to eliminate the rat fees and reduce the vendor revenue. Practice procedural prudence. So again, some of these buzzwords: process, 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 and document. Here's more good news, okay, is that you don't have to have the best performing funds, and you don't have to have the cheapest funds, but you have to have a process. You have to have a method for your madness, right? So you need to document your due diligence process, because if ever falls to the carpet, and in the private sector, what we're seeing, the new tobacco litigations, ERISA litigation, it's employees saying, you know, I have $200,000 in my retirement account, but I was in the money market for the last 20 years, and you never educated me or told me that I should have been in the balanced fund or the growth fund, and I should have, would have, could have had $400,000. The fees were too high, and it eroded my rate of return. I should have, would have, could have had $400,000 paid. And they're winning. They're suing their plan sponsors, their record keepers. Now, if the plan sponsors have a due diligence process, that's their defense. Right? We're in America. Anybody can sue anybody and name anybody in a lawsuit anytime. Okay? But if you have a process that you can fall back on, that's your defense, and you'll be exonerated from any a bad judgment. So I didn't know, unfortunately, is not a defense when we're talking about fiduciary duties, which is why it's so important to have a process in place, document that process. If you don't want to do it, outsource it. So, you know, two good news. You can outsource it, you don't need to do it. Outsource your liability, the fiduciary obligations and responsibilities. And two is, you don't have to have a perfect plan. You just have to have a consistent process. And whatever advisor or consultant you're utilizing will be able to document that consistent process for you. Have I not moved this? Oh, here we go. Oh, maybe that's where I am. This should be number 4, I guess. Read and follow your plan documents. Oftentimes, I just see a lot of operational defects because plan sponsors may not be following what the documents state they need to be doing internally, which is why it's so important to review your service agreements, review plan documents. If you have an investment policy statement, you have to review it and update it, because you don't have to have an investment policy statement. In ERISA, it actually states you have to act as if you have a well-written investment policy statement. But if you do have one, which is best practice, you must comply with it. Because as you all know, something's in writing if you want to follow it. So when you have an investment policy statement, for example, we write investment policy statements and we review them and we update them every year on behalf of our clients. We also tie it technologically to third-party fund analytics. So our clients can never be out of compliance with their investment policy statement. We set the internal controls that a fund goes on the watch list if it's not meeting 6 out of 12 of the quantitative and qualitative factors of an investment option. It's automatically on the watch list. Now, what we do internally in the committee room with that fund, you know, we keep a little bit more flexible. We want the investment policy statement to be written broadly enough to allow for flexibility, but narrow in scope enough that you can follow a specific and objective process. Monitoring performance of the investments and investment managers, again, as I say, it's simple, it's not easy, right? When you have an investment policy statement and you have third-party fund analytics, it's just like hitting a button, you know. My investment analyst would kill me if they heard me say that, but you hit a button, you know what funds are on a watch list, and then we can talk about beta coefficients and Sharpe ratios all day if you want to, but we don't need to do that. We need to focus on everything else and simply document in your minutes that you are monitoring the funds and what's on a watch list and when and why. Review and monitor plan expenses and fees. Again, I can't talk about this enough. Fees, again, they don't have to be the cheapest, but they have to be reasonable for the services provided. If you haven't benchmarked your plan or your fees in the last 2 to 3 years, you need to. Fee disclosure has caused competition and a lot of compression of fees in the industry. So as I mentioned before, just by asking or just by getting a fee benchmarking study done could potentially lower your fees without me having to do much, just asking about it. I just reviewed a plan recently. It's an $80 million plan, and the record keeper was earning 27 basis points. And they engaged us just to do the review. I sent a letter to the vendor and said, we're reviewing, please provide me this documentation. And they immediately went to the client and reduced their fees to 19 basis points. That's eight basis points, right? I didn't even do anything. I just asked for information. I could have come back and said that their fees were reasonable and they're doing a great job, and they didn't have to do that. But that's just an example of, when you ask for something, they know what's coming next. When you ask for your contract, your agreement, your service agreement, your fee disclosure, they know what's coming next, and they know that's the time to be proactive, because there is a lot of competition right now between all these vendors. And you probably have every vendor knocking on your door right now, all the ICMAs and Great West and Nationwide, and they want to get in. They want to get in, and if they're in, they want in on the other plans you have as well, right?
We have a contract with our provider, 3 basis points. It's in the contract. What is the purpose of asking for the fee savings? They can charge me 23 basis points, but it's in the contract. So I don't understand through this venture. You do have a contract.
So you mean you don't think they'll change it? Oh, okay. So contracts can always be negotiated. Yeah, so 23 big, I don't know how big your plan is. Do you know how big? 16 million? Okay. So if their revenue is 23 basis points and that's it, that's what they're earning, there's no additional sub-NAV or RAP, I would argue that could potentially be reasonable and customary. But, and it's in the contract, and your contract may be a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, that doesn't mean that the fees can't change during that period. It may mean that they can't increase. They'll guarantee their fee not to increase for the next 3 years. But that doesn't mean you can't ask them to decrease their fees, okay? So I would still ask them for the revenue disclosure and benchmark it. And then you have to have that in your documentation anyway. Even if it is reasonable and customary and their fees are benchmarking out below peer group, that's great. All the more reason to send PR notifications to the employees telling them the great news. Okay, so reviewing and monitoring plan fees, hiring professionals, once again, if you don't have the time or inclination or expertise or experience to do this stuff internally, outsource it. No reason to have that liability internally, no reason to have those duties if you don't need to or want to do it. Review the service provider contract. I mentioned this, but this is really important. Once again, if you haven't reviewed your service contract, and Diane can talk about her experience over the last couple weeks, reviewing all of her service contracts and speaking with her vendors, they could be very outdated. You may find that there's termination fees, that there's back-end charges. I've seen contracts with 15-year graded surrender charges. meaning if the employer were to move to a new record keeper, all of the employees would be hit with a back-end fee unless the last time they contributed to an investment was 15 years ago. Because it's ongoing, it's not like a 15-year vesting. It goes by the last contribution date. So they would be hit with upwards of 5% of their balance. So I've seen a lot of outdated contracts. They can be renegotiated and they can be rewritten to get rid of those back-end charges. Some fixed accounts I've seen have 5-year puts, 10-year puts at the plan sponsor level and at the employee level. Meaning if your employees are in a fixed account earning 1, 2, or 3% and they want to get out, there's liquidity restrictions, so they may have to get out of that fund over 10 years. Some of the contracts that I've read. Most of the governmental contracts I've read are 5-year puts. That would not apply in the private market. 1-year put is the longest. 12-month puts are the longest you see in the private market. Read and negotiate those service contracts. RFP every 3 to 5 years. It's just standard best practice. It doesn't mean you're unhappy. It doesn't mean you're compelled to move or make a change or the grass is greener on the other side. But things change in every industry, as you know. So why not RFP every 3 to 5 years? Go see what Mass Mutual's got. Go see what Great West has, ICMA. And that will encourage your existing and incumbent providers to sharpen their pencil and make sure that they're offering you the best services at the lowest cost. That's number 10. Lastly is the fiduciary checklist. So this is in the deck that you have in front of you. Just something to take back with you, and you can chat with your retirement plan committee to make sure that you're doing everything properly and diligently and documenting everything. So I'm going to open up to questions and then pass the mic along to Steve and Diane. Any questions for me?
I actually have a question for you. When I was doing my research, I found these nationwide fees, so I'm just going to hand them to you. And I thought you could just explain to everybody really what is a rack fee and what is a 12-week fee, because you do see those in the contracts. And I know I had to do a little bit of research before I understood it.
Okay. So this is a very similar spreadsheet to what we were looking at. So there's the prospectus gross expense ratio, so that would be the total expense ratio next to the assets there. The fund management fee, the 12B1 fee,
Now, is that the
and
same?
other expenses. Those are all built in to the expense ratio. So that 50, 25, and 13, you all can't see, but that makes up the 88, right?
But a rack fee versus a 12B fee.
The RAP fee is in addition, so they add on the nationwide administrative fee.
So the rack fee is going strictly to the provider,
Yes.
not the fund, and those are fund expenses in the beginning.
Some are going to the fund manager, and some of those are going to nationwide. So the fund management fee is going to the money manager, which in this case, that would be like looking at, well, that's not up there. But the difference between the 71 and the 35, what's that, 36? Right? That's going to go to American Century. Here, that's 13. And it's going to nationwide because it happens to be a nationwide fund. So it's going to the nationwide money manager. The rest, the 12B1, is typically for commissions, if there's a broker. If there's no broker, it's going to the record keeper. The other expenses of 50, I don't know what that means, it's just other, and it's going to nationwide. So those are sub-NAV revenue sharing. So all of these are it could be sub-NAV. So there's binders, fees, shareholding fees, 12B1s, fees. Those are all built into the expense ratio, and they go to the record keeper. Okay, the only thing that goes to the actual money manager are the money management fees. Okay, what's left over, and then they add the RAP on top of it. That you're like a variable
what this is telling you is it's very similar. If Joe Blow walked into Schwab, he would pay 88 basis points for this fund, but your participant's paying 1.48 because Nationwide is adding a wrap, just like Great West was adding this 95 basis point wrap. So they're paying 1.40 the employee. Again, it could be reasonable and customary. It's not inappropriate to add the wrap. These record keepers need to get paid. They are not-for-profit organizations. You want them to be a profitable partner. You want them to be around when you retire. You just don't need your rate of return to be eroded too much for services that are commensurate with the fees that they're providing.
And the other question I have is on those RAP fees. Have you seen in your consulting practice where the cities or counties have paid the RAP fee? No. Okay. I was just wondering if they would consider that a perk, you know, to the.
I don't think it's in their budget.
No, and I haven't seen it. Now, I've seen very rarely where, a Nationwide could say, we need $30,000 to record keep this plan, and then the employer could pay that, but not with a wrap. You negotiate that wrap away. If you have a $10 million plan or more, $20 million plan or more, you shouldn't have a wrap.
The 12B, is that what that is? Yeah, that fee. Do you know any entity out there they're sharing that fee with the provider? I was told a long time ago that I don't want to call it kickback. It's like, some of his contract may say that he shared
With a broker.
with the sponsor.
Yeah. Not with the plan sponsor. It should never be shared with the plan sponsor. So that would be a conflict, prohibited transaction. But the 12B1, money can never go back to the sponsor. Okay? It can go back to the plan.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, it can go back to the plan. 12B1s are basically commissions. So if you ever had back in the day a broker sell you a plan like Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch, sell you a 457 plan or a 401k plan, they're going to get those 12B1s. Right now, in your plans, the record keeper is just keeping it. Okay. Sometimes there could be a broker involved. If you have a broker that's earning commission off your plan and his services are free because you can't see them, he or she is earning those 12B1s. So Nationwide would kick that to a broker.
Have you seen people of any plan is getting that kind of recognition?
Back to the plan? Yes, so for example, a little bit. So for example, in this, with this particular plan, they had 33 basis points of sub-NAV revenue sharing dollars, right? And the wrap of 95. Great West, we negotiated that away, we negotiated that down to 26. So there was 7 basis points extra. That sits in an administrative pot that can be used to pay other plan expenses, like a consultant or an advisor or an attorney or education and communication, or you can credit that back to participant balances.
Jamie, you touched on it, but maybe explain it a little more. When I was working with our consultant, the comment that they made is that we've been with our plan for like 20 or 30 years, that if you haven't really actively managed it, you might be surprised at the expenses that you're paying. And even if you brought a consultant in, they could probably end up being paid from the savings. You wouldn't even have to go into your own general fund. You wouldn't have to talk about it to your government agencies to where they're going to have to come up with money. I guess there are options, but you might want to explain that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Talking about the budgets, whether it's a planned budget expense or the city or county budget. So how advisors and consultants can get paid? It's appropriate for the plan to pay it, legal and appropriate, and it's legal and appropriate for it to be in the city or county bill. We can be paid for by the plan. So then even the net cost to the employees is still revenue positive by engaging a consultant. Because at times, we can at least offset our fee, if not completely dwarf our fee and the cost savings that we get.
So how do you arrange for the plan that pays for the consultant?
That's a good question, because sometimes it's a big headache, actually, and most often, cities will say, we'll just pay for it, because it's a pain in the butt. But they all can do it. Typically, fees should be paid, in my opinion, be paid pro rata by the participant. If you have a forfeiture account, you might not, but 401A, sometimes there's forfeiture accounts, and when non-vested employees leave and money goes into the forfeiture account, use that to pay for your consultant. Or ERISA, you can create administrative buckets, meaning if there's more rev share than the vendor needs, that extra 7 basis points will sit in the bucket, and you use that to pay your consultant. Okay? And then any extra that needs to go to the consultant will be taken from the plan participants pro rata, which means the participants that have higher balances are going to be paid as a percentage. So they're just like they're paying here. This is all asset-based compensation, right? So somebody that has $100 in the plan is going to be paying a lot less than somebody with $1 million in the plan. And they take it, the record keepers can deduct the fee pro rata. So if the fee is $5,000 a quarter, they look at the participant balances, and they deduct pro rata. Now, what's troubling about that, because the record keepers have never been disclosing the fees in the first place, now all of a sudden that consultant fee will be a line item on the statement. And the employees do not know that they were just saved 40 basis points, the fee's only 10, net, their revenue positive 30, they won't know that. Okay, because they never saw the other fees, they only see this new fee. So if you're doing it that way, you want to be very specific with how you effectively communicate to your employees before that happens. So the cities or counties that pay our fee, they're paying for it from the forfeiture account, from the administrative account, and if there is none of those, typically they just pay it because they think I was the line the other day, juices and orange fees to deduct the de minimis accounts from the employees and get that pushback from the employees. It's just not worth it, so they find it in the budget.
Ever since we've been exploring what the different duties are and the expertise required to fulfill the fiduciary duty, I've been very concerned. And I know that it's in ERISA as an option to get a consultant or third party that needs to farm out that fiduciary liability or duty to help avoid liability. But I'm sure there's a Ninth Circuit case that said, well, there is some case law developing that doesn't necessarily shield us from liability just because we've got a third party consultant. I don't know the citation, but it's Tibble versus Edison. You heard of that? It's in 2013. Somebody's relying on a consultant that they brought in because that consultant wasn't doing a good job. And the court said, well, you had a duty to be reviewing if they were doing that. And it's kind of negates the purpose in my mind.
That is true. And that, I think that's on one of my slides, is that when you delegate, you still have a duty to monitor who you're delegating to. So,
How does that not kind of meet the effectiveness of having that?
well, it's kind of like, I guess what you're doing now, which is you're hiring, Nationwide and ICMA and Great West to provide services, but nobody's really managing them, right? Nobody knows what their fees are, nobody's managing them. You still have, even though you outsource the administration, you still have to know if they're doing their job right, and you still have to benchmark them, and you still have to deem their services reasonable cost rate, just like any partner that you have. So when you hire a consultant or advisor, and they're contractually in writing a fiduciary to your plan, they are liable for the funds and the fees in the plan. But you are still a fiduciary, and you're still responsible to monitor the consultant.
Consultants often, because of that issue, give indemnity
any contract. But they are, by law, by statute, responsible for picking those funds, managing the funds, in the lineup. Now, other duties are, the non-fiduciary duties fall outside the funds and fees, may not be the advisor's responsibility. But yes, you do have a duty to monitor, who are you hiring anyway? Is it Joe Blow, with a name tag that says I'm a fiduciary? And if you do that, you need to make sure that they do follow a diligent, proactive process.
Maybe that.
Right, so I've seen case law like that, where there was something, George versus Kraft Foods. And George was the employee, they were with Fidelity, and the Kraft Foods had a consultant who benchmarked Fidelity and gathered RFIs and went through processes. And the employees said, well, our fees were too high, and Fidelity's revenue sharing of their own funds was too high, and blah, 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 and with their rate return, so and he ended up winning. And it ended up being that the plan sponsor was at fault, even though the consultant was benchmarking Fidelity services and fees. The fact that they didn't go through the full-blown RFP and yet customized pricing and services proposals from other vendors, they were at fault. So now, that case law, it is best practice to go so far as to not just benchmark it, not just get RFIs out there, but to actually go through the dog and pony show every 3 to 5 years. Again, even though there's no intent to change, no compelling reason to change, you do want to follow that proper due diligence and pay for your files. Okay, let's
And I was asked by Diane to come and speak to you as an actual county government. We are currently in the process of changing from a plan provider that we've had for the last, since at least 1988. And we're moving over to another plan provider. It was probably back in 2006 that our sheriff's office, they actually moved away from Nationwide, and they went to work with Mass Mutual. So what I kind of learned from that is that the individual officers can actually get their own different plan in terms of county government. We don't have to necessarily follow what the Board of County Commissioners does. So what we did in the clerk's office, after we even formed a committee with the county commission and county administrative people, and we went through the whole process of establishing a deferred compensation policy. If anybody ever wants a copy, feel free, we'll send it to you. We decided that the county administration side really wasn't that interested in looking at a different plan provider. The excuse that they usually gave to me was that a lot of people were really impressed with the 3.5% fixed rate that they would get from Nationwide. So they wouldn't even entertain the idea of going out and doing an RFP. I would talk to the human resource. He'd say, let's bring Angela from Nationwide and we'll discuss this. Well, after the second or third time, I thought, this isn't working. I really don't know how aggressive I can be with her unless I go out and see what other companies have to offer. So what the presentation what I have here for you is really the presentation we made to our clerk employees. Scott Ellis told me that this is not something we're just going to go do for the whole office. We really need to talk to everybody to explain what is involved, what opportunities they may have out there if we go and choose from other different providers. So we put a presentation together. I know Diane kind of complimented me for the art, but I'll have to tell you it wasn't me. We got this from Orange County government. Orange County, their sheriff, I believe, moved it out of Nationwide back in 2006 or 7, and then not long after that, the rest of the county government, they did an RFP and moved to Vanguard, which is the plan provider I believe they currently have. Now, I'll probably refer to Vanguard a couple of times. I'm not really promoting any different vendors, I'm just telling you the different companies that we spoke to. The big reason we couldn't move to Vanguard was we don't have $20 million in our plan. So that's one of the benefits that Orange County had on moving over to Vanguard. Our clerk's plan has about $9.8 million. The overall county, we have about $80 million. When we spoke to our employees, the first group we had about 70, and the second group was 20. We basically told them, and it wasn't just me. I had Mark Peterson, many of you may know him. Him and I kind of played tag. We went back and forth. We made it a conversational presentation. We wanted anybody that had any questions during the process to please bring them up. I'm usually better at answering questions when I'm on the subject, especially if this is not a full-time thing that I do. So I encourage you to do the same thing if you have any questions on what we've shared with them or anything as we go along. So the main point that we wanted to make to our employees, that we've been with this company for the last 30 plus years. There really hasn't been any aggressive approaches taken with them to get their costs reduced. And I really only became kind of informed on this during the last 10 years. So the first 20, basically nothing occurred. Well, we finally got the county to do that policy, which was a good step. And as I said, since they weren't going to employ the move list, we decided to move with the clerk in place. We explained that there's the potential for lower fees, the investment options. When, I don't know, probably 5-10 years ago, I asked Nationwide that, we have there's these target date funds out there. There are different funds that are described differently with different companies. And a lot of people, even in our plan, it's probably standard for a lot of them, they just put all their money into fixed. So it's like 50% of our $10 million plan is in fixed. And this is not just retirees either. There's people that just started working there, and their money was in fixed. When I started, I guarantee you I didn't know what I know now. I put all my money in fixed, and it took a while before I could get it out. But I guarantee you the return has been a lot better. There's more risk, but I've been much more pleased with the return. So our point was that we wanted to improve what was available to them come retirement. We explained what these plans are, the fact that it strictly supplements the retirement system of Florida. One of the comments that the county's HR director would tell me was, Steve, we really don't need to be too aggressive on it because it's just supplementing the Florida retirement pension system that they already have. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know that I'd classify that as a fiduciary or a prudent-minded person. So I decided to pursue it. And as we go through it, I'll give you an idea as to what a 0.5%, 1%, or 2% return over 20 or 30 years can add up to. And I'm pretty sure most of you would not necessarily have to raise your hand, but I'm pretty sure you'd rather have the money yourself rather than someone else. My position was that the clerk is the sponsor and the fiduciary. I took it upon myself because I'm basically the numbers person. I'm not about to go to my elected officials and say, hey, Scott, you know all about these 457 things. So I took that, and I explained to them that this is strictly your employee contributions. There's no employer money that's in there. And, of course, it's before federal taxes. Jamie touched on some of the legal issues that have happened, specifically, I'm sure a lot more in the 401k area than in the 457. But the consultants that I work with, they said, Steve, it's probably just a matter of time before you're going to start feeling this in the 457 area. And I know one of the questions that Diane shared with me was, who's the fiduciary? Now, is that really legally defined in Florida as to who the fiduciary is? I'm not sure, but as I said before, I'm the finance person, so I'm probably the most qualified person to jump in there and say, we need to provide something good for the employees in their retirement. again, you know, the fees and everything need to be adequately disclosed. When I tried to get information, it took time to get it. When we look at our plans, the information on what the expenses are is not real easy. And I always, even when I spoke to Orange County, their comment was, Steve, I'm not really sure Nationwide disclosing everything. And you know, I'm not here to criticize them. I'm just telling you what my experience is. Again, we've been with them since 1989, and I can tell you that when they were selected, it was not through a competitive process. It was just the introduction of the 457 plan. Now, the example that I shared with the employees was over a 20-year period, the annual charges and fees, and how it can reduce their account depending on what their fees are. So we started out with $20,000 up front for 20 years, and with the 7% return each year and 0.5% fee, that's what she would have. Now, as the fees started increasing, that of course reduces what we're going to have after that 20-year period. In this case, by 17%, $12,000, which I'm sure most of us would prefer to have that. And remember, at least in my case, we're the ones that are managing that plan. The employees really can't come up and say, hey, I want my expenses reduced, so I'm going to move it to a different plan. No, they cannot really move their money out of the 457 until they retire. So when we spoke to our active employees. Now, I'm not being critical of retirees, but when people retire, it opens the door up. They can go move their money to an IRA or any other plan that they wish to have. I think there's only a slight, and correct me, under the 457, you can actually move your money without being penalized tax-wise, but that's as of a certain age. So like in my case, I'm not too concerned about it. When I get, I don't expect I'll be pulling out before I get to that age anyway. There's that 10%, and then I think there might have been another one.
Yeah, with a 457, when you take the money out, you're hit with income taxes.
Correct.
Right, but there's no 59.5 rule like there is in the 401k or IRA. If you touch it before then, you're hit with an additional 10% tax penalty. That's not in the 457. If you take it out early, you pay taxes, but not the 10% penalty.
So I expect I'll be 59.5 before I start using that. So now the next one is if you're paying a 2.5% fee, it reduces your plan by your assets by 32%. Now, as I asked earlier, when I went out and got some informal proposals, they were actually upfront as to what their costs were. This plan that we got back in 1980s, we even have a hard time going and finding all the documents to it, and being able to read it is pretty difficult. So to really find what the fees are, there might be something as to what the fees are, but there's all these other costs that may come out directly, they may not be completely disclosed. Whether a plan participant, individual people may see it is kind of up in the air. So that's why when we went out for our proposals, we specifically asked, we want to see what these costs are going to be for each participant. And we actually, Mark and myself, were the ones that reviewed what funds should be in there. We looked a lot at Vanguard. Some of the funds that the company that we selected, we looked at those also. Here's where I explained to the employees that these are the different proposals we received. That's our current one with Nationwide. And you may not be able to read the fine print down at the bottom, but the reason, what made it difficult was like 50% of all the money was in the Nationwide fixed. And what they would tell us is you're earning 3.5% on that. But in reality, there's probably an expense associated with that. It's just not disclosed anywhere. So what we kind of followed what Orange County did, and we just assumed that in order to come up with that 0.94, that the cost for that fixed account was 100 basis points. And we weighted that in there. So we came up with nationwide was costing 0.94. Vanguard we could get at 0.32, which was the best. Unfortunately, we didn't have 20 million in our plan. And I've also been told by some that the amount of counseling and everything else that they do may not be as at the same level as some other plan providers. The Florida League of Cities, we spoke to them, and the interesting about their plan is you can have one participant, or you can have 400, and it's going to be the same cost. It's not going to matter. So, and they did use all Vanguard, but we elected not to go with them because we have quite a few participants in there, and we wanted to shoot for some economies of scale. And then the Mass Mutual. Now, when you look at the bottom, you look at how much each participant is paying, and we felt it was pretty prudent on our part to choose one of the lower ones, and just also make sure that we're going to be getting the qualitative services that the employees want. Oh, and there has been some discussion about like termination fees, which is what we discuss here. What we found with Nationwide is that our termination cost is based on where the market is in terms of bonds and the fixed account. So if they go out and they buy bonds for the fixed account and they have a positive value due to the market, then there really won't be any cost. We'll basically get out of there. Assuming nothing changed since we got the information from them, we probably get out with a surplus of $450,000 in the clerk's plan. Now, if rates were suddenly shot up a couple hundred points tomorrow, then that's probably all going to go away, because their point is that they would need to have their market value adjustment factor.
Steve?
Yes.
I was just going to say one quick thing. I work for Orange County now, and I'm chief deputy for Martha Haney. And it's really interesting looking at this because I worked for Osceola County. I was really somebody who helped spearhead this a couple of years ago. Much smaller at Osceola County. We also could not get Vanguard. We were about 33 million, but by moving away from Nationwide, I was just looking back at my notes, we saved half. We cut our fees from 400,000 down to 200,000. And I actually worked for the sheriff's office back at that time, and we worked with the county, with all the constitutionals together. We did it as a group. We pulled the sheriff in, and it was really interesting. Nationwide would not negotiate with us when they gave us a slight bump down, because they realized if you bump this down substantially, we're going to go out competitively. And then Orange County you've referenced, which is where I work now, I was not involved in that process. They have 170, we have 175 million. So it's much larger. The bottom line is, no matter what size the program is, you go out and competitively bid. You know, when these plans first came in, 30 years ago is when I first brought it in the city that I worked for. Back at that time, there were only a couple providers, and there wasn't a lot of computer support. We didn't have a lot of control over this, but over time, as a lot of people have come in, and the profit margins have gone way out, Nationwide, and I really like the people at Nationwide, we almost had some problems with this when we got ready to do this too, because there was some contact made that the retirees liked the representatives. So, you establish personal relationships with people, and they were worried. So what we did is we went out and got the top 50 account holders and had a big meeting with them, between me, the financial advisor, just so they realized what a great deal this was. And as soon as they understood it, there wasn't another, word of discontent.
We've had a few employees, and they're probably approaching retirement. One sent us an example to our HR representative, and no criticism, but she's not a financial person. She forwarded along to Scott and myself and said, well, Steve, this change in the fixed interest rate is going to impact my retirement by $40 a month.
Yeah, that's right.
And I thought, okay, well, gee, I understand, and I can't really be your financial advisor, but if all you did was put your money into this fixed account for the last 30 years, you'd probably be in much better shape if it was somewhere else. And the other approach I've informally taken on this is that, sure, you have retirees in there, and naturally they would want to be conservative, but you have people that are just starting to work. And if these 1 or 2% in expenses or returns each year, for them it's going to add up to a lot of money. And you're going to have this rolling effect of having retirees in there. So to what degree do you really accommodate them? We had a few. One, she was a single mother, and you could tell from the questions she was asking me, she was very confused. She's not a financial person. I respected her, but it really, in the end, it came down to a very small percentage of them. And I do want to thank Orange County. They've been great. Mark and I, we went over and spoke to them. They've sent us the information. They even offered to have, I think, an attorney that works with you.
Bernie Bryce actually is the general counsel for the sheriff's office, and it's really funny because I worked at Osceola County. It's a small kind of community. She and I talked about this, and that really absolutely contributed to what I was able to accomplish at Osceola County.
And I know the point Jim was making is he was availing himself to everybody, because this is really that important that people can have more money when it comes to retirement. They availed themselves to us. It was great.
You're talking Jim Moy?
Yes.
Jim Moy's my predecessor. He is. By the way, he's doing extremely well too.
I'm glad to hear that. Let's see, where were we? So what I did is I pulled down some of these retirement 2030 funds, which are basically your target date. And I pulled them down from different companies. Now, let me qualify. I can't tell you that each one of these companies puts the same amount in stocks versus bonds versus cash. And as far as the period that they go out, they're not all identical, so we're not really comparing apples to apples. But this is the type of information that I wanted to share with the employees, that, okay, you go over and you look at Nationwide and you look at the return that we've gotten on that, and then you go look at Vanguard or T. Rowe Price. Now, over a period, as I showed you before, these percentages can add up to a decent amount of money that you'll have in your coffers when you retire. Down at the bottom, and I know I kind of discussed this with Jamie, and I'm sorry, but I can't tell you if the answer is yes or no. But sometimes when you go and you look on a specific mutual fund, you'll find expense information, and normally the return is supposed to be net of the expense. Is that correct?
It should be.
It should be. So that's sometimes what we have to make sure of. But you'll see down at the bottom that the expenses vary substantially. Now, Vanguard is strictly, what's the word?
Proprietary?
No, they're indexed.
Oh,
They're strictly indexed.
yeah.
Yes, they're passive. Now, down on Morningstar, we looked at those carefully also. T. Rowe Price and Vanguard were on top of what Nationwide was at. So then, I also wanted to help and explain to the employees what really these retirement or target date funds are. And since, a lot of the people that would put their money into fixed, my safe assumption was they're not very financially astute or knowledgeable of what's happening in the investment world. So I explained to them that when you start working, if you're not expected to retire till 2035, then you would put it into that fund. And the investments would be allocated majority stocks and less bonds. And then as you get older and you're actually getting to retirement, it just reverses itself. And it does it automatically. So that way, if some of the employees are not aggressive enough to handle it themselves, it will just happen. Now, I did read articles that, target date funds don't necessarily guarantee everything because markets can change at any given point. So you still really need to watch it, or being the person, they still need to try and watch it. So that's why we brought that information up to them. And in the end, And I called Florida retirement system myself. I told them, we're not your investment advisors. We don't want to hold ourselves out to be that. But I do think that we are your fiduciaries. And Florida retirement system has, what is it, Ernst & Young? They're actually the consultants for it. All you have to do is call them. You can send them a list of all of your assets, your spouse's assets, and say, hey, this is what I'm planning for in retirement. They already know what you're getting in terms of your pension, or if you are part of the defined contribution plan, they know what you're putting in there. All you really need to do is give them the rest of the information. They can tell you, are you well prepared for retirement, or aren't you? So I bring this to them because I don't want them to feel like, hey, they have to go out and hire a financial consultant. They already have one available to them for free. Some of them did have their own consultants, and they might bring this up with them. But from an individual standpoint, these people, you and I, we already have access to someone for retirement to help us put this together. And as we went through it, we said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But the way I phrase it is probably not the most formal, is there's no such thing as a stupid question. So ask us, and if we don't really have the answer, we'll find out. Or if we think it's giving you too much personal investment advice, we'll explain that. But we'll also explain where you can probably go and answer your question. So that's what we're doing. We're in the process with Mass Mutual. We're going to be speaking with them for about a half an hour each week to just follow the process that we're going to do. They're going to have some material. We're selecting what type of approach that they should share this information with the employees. And that's really where we are at as of today. So if you have any questions, please feel free. We did not hire a consultant. We did work with a consultant, I think, out of Virginia. And the way I met him was at one of these FGFOA conferences. And he basically volunteered. Now, if the county was to move their entire 80 million assets and go out, I would have hired him. I didn't think it was the wisest thing to do with 9 million or so I kind of handled it myself. But I was pretty convinced that if we did it for the whole 80 million, we would have covered the cost of a consultant in no time at all. I would have rather done it. And also, I think you mentioned something about doing RFPs. We didn't really do a formal RFP. We got some information from those companies I had listed. We also looked at Palm Beach Clerk, and the one that they selected, we made sure that they were part of the interview. An interesting thing that we found when we looked at the Clerk with Palm Beach is they got a proposal from Nationwide, and we have been with Nationwide since the 80s. Their fixed account was 3.5%. When I talked to Nationwide, whether it was I want to move to one of these lower cost institutional funds. The comment that they would make to me is, well, Steve, we don't make as much money off that. It's like, oh gosh. And then I would ask them, can we look at Vanguard funds? And then they would tell me, well, Steve, we don't really get any revenue sharing. And maybe I should have asked because I was told that they actually will consider Vanguard. But I think, this is just my thought, that they weren't really interested in just handling $9 million in the clerk's office, because when you look at the whole county, there's like $80 million in there. So, why really have Steve be the one to make the big change for this whole $80 million? But when they put their proposal in for Palm Beach Clerk, they offered to do Vanguard, but they weren't providing the floor of 3.5% anymore. It was down to 1%. So my theory that some of these people that are a little more on the aggressive side are basically paying the cost of those that are in the fixed account kind of came true for me. So, any more questions? Yes?
Steve, you got some pushback from the county. Why was that?
The pushback was they liked the 3.5%. Now, I'm guessing they didn't hold meetings with their employees like I did. So for all I know, they may have heard it from just a few, or it could have come from retirees, which for all we know, retirees could be some county commissioners, we never know. But I think they were in a little more of a pressured position that, you know, they got 5 people they have to deal with. I only had 1 clerk I needed to explain this to.
There's no more questions. Great job by the panel. We appreciate it.
One other comment, since the applause came, I don't, it's not a big deal for me, but what was interesting when we spoke to our groups of employees, the second group of about 20 people, when we got to the end, Mark and I were up in the front, and they started giving us this standing ovation. I said, what's going on here? You know, we're just basically doing our job. And some of the comments they made was, you know, Steve, it wasn't until recently that I found out that I could move my money out of the police account. I said, for real? Wow. That's interesting. And then another lady, she stood up and said, Steve, you know, no one has ever really spoke to us about this before. And I said, I know we're not really giving you advice, but this is your money, you know, and we're the financial people. I can't really jump out and say that there's somebody else jumping out and managing this. So we were very pleased. The thing that pleased me the most is that the employees were glad that we did this. That's what was important to me.
Very good. Thank you very much.